welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of a Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome to this podcast called Teaching Early Writing from Program to Professional Plan. And a very warm welcome to our special guest, Grace Cullen, a foundational reception teacher at Littlehampton Primary School. Grace is in her second year of teaching and has recently made a switch in her teaching in the way she teaches writing to her students.
Well, firstly, just big welcome to Grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I know you've done a welcome, but it's like bring Grace to the room. So exciting to have Grace here.
Thank you.
In second year of teaching. And I think, Grace, that means I might have just about known you for the whole time that you've been teaching.
Yeah, pretty much, because I think one of those first PDs that I had last year, it was with you.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's been the whole journey.
Yes, yeah. So exciting to have you here. And we'll just let everyone know too that, oh my goodness, we almost had a podcast before the podcast because Grace has been so excited about what has been happening with her students in writing. You're in for a real treat here to have Grace talk about this. Oh. So anyway.
To interrupt that, Sharon,
yes.
we just asked Grace a little bit about what you've been up to lately.
Well, I've just been on school holidays, so it's been really nice taking a bit of a break.
Yep.
Weather's been really nice as well. So
Don't you appreciate holidays when you're a teacher?
Oh my gosh, so much. Yeah, it's so nice to just like reset and have a bit of a...
It's like the first week you collapse and then the second week you sort of...
Can do a bit more stuff, so that's been good.
Do podcasts.
Do podcasts, exactly. Talk about teaching.
Yeah.
We used to have a holidays at Christmas time that were 8 weeks long, and by the...
Here in South Australia.
Yeah, 7th and 8th week, you almost forgot you were a teacher.
Because you'd be done, you'd be like, oh, it's just life now.
Yeah, And today we're just going to talk about a struggle that teachers have. It's teachers find it hard sometimes to teach writing to younger students, and students find it difficult to start and then continue their writing. Teachers need ways, tips, tools, structures, routines, devices to make the teaching and learning of writing more effective as well as more enjoyable. So that's what teachers are struggling with sometimes.
And we have made a particular focus on foundation.
Yeah.
Or prep or reception or whatever it's called in your part of the world, kindergarten in America. Because, of course, we've got these young people wanting to be able to do all kinds of things. And as teachers, we're thinking we want to get them going. And then I think that struggle often is the mismatch between what we know we're trying to help them achieve by the end of the year and where they are when they come. And in fact, where they are when they come is enough. And it's from there that we can start doing the big work.
But going back a step, can we just chat to you, Grace, about your career journey so far? What sort of things have you done, especially PD, that changed the way you've thought about things?
Yeah, for sure. So I was originally early childhood trained. So I did most of my placements and experience at kindergartens and early learning centres. So moving to school was a big jump for me last year because I started at Littlehampton term 2 and I was doing like a team job share with another really experienced teacher. So I learnt a lot from her because before that I'd only been in schools on one placement for 6 weeks. Right. So I really didn't have that much experience with teaching reading and writing. Like, you have the early mark making that you do in kindy and in early learning centres, but that was a big jump for me. And then, I've done some PDs with Sharon and with, we did like Be Brave and Teach Literacy and Numeracy. And those were all super helpful.
So you learn a bit more about how to teach reading and writing?
Yeah,
did you?
yeah, exactly. Because, they don't really cover that much in uni, like of the specifics.
You get bits, or you get a broad brushstroke of what you should be doing.
Yeah, you get it's very broad, but not the actual specifics of how to teach it, or if a child's struggling with a specific area, how you can address that. So, and
what tools to use, and strategies, and
and every school's different as well. So
changes.
So key takeaways from some of your PD. What would be some things that you can remember that you took away from it?
I think learning about the structures of different lessons and how to kind of hone in children's attention at the start and kind of make it really clear what your intention is for that lesson. And I know like using mentor texts was a big one for me that I introduced this year that I hadn't been doing last year, and showing an example of what you wanted your students to be able to do. I feel like that really helped me, because it kind of gave me an idea too of what I was looking for from them. Mm-hmm. So that was really good.
Yep. And in your teaching, you were using a program for writing, were you?
Yes, we were.
What was that, and how was that working?
Yeah, so we used Read, Write, Ink. Yep. And so basically across the junior primary classes, the kids would be streamlined depending on what level they were at. So they had different groups. Abilities, yeah. So like there was the higher group, and they were all different colours, and it went all the way up to year 2. So you'd have lots of different kids each term coming into your classroom, or your kids leaving. So, and then it was an hour a day for 4 days, and it would just follow the same kind of structure each time. Was it mostly about reading, or? It was both. It was more reading, I think. They did a lot of paired reading, and the writing was mainly like holding a sentence and being able to kind of. Well, this was at my level that we did, which was with the earlier ones, was holding a sentence, so being able to remember that sentence in your head and then go off and write it and getting the punctuation right and that kind of thing. So they'd read a sentence and then hold it in their head and then write it. Yeah, so we kind of like would build that sentence, and then with the higher ones you'd add on and you'd think about comprehension and those kinds of things. So the sentence they were writing was their own sentence? No, it was the one sentence. It was the one sentence for everyone. Right. So it wasn't really differentiated, but that was supposed to be because the other groups had gone. So it was that kind of differentiation, but it wasn't very individualised. And how was it working? How did you find the kids? I think behaviour was a big one at our school, like with that, like especially at that time of day, you'd get all those ones that struggled with reading and writing. That would be quite a big trigger for them. Oh, you'd get worse behaviour? Or? Yes. Yeah. They would refuse to go. Well, this was last year when I'm thinking of, and they would refuse to go to different classes because I don't know if they were nervous about different, just like the change of routine was just too big for some, especially with on the spectrum and those kinds of things. The routine's really important. So yeah. Sharon, you've noticed some things in the curriculum that you could talk about? Oh, well, actually, I think, because we're focusing on foundation, I thought, it's good for us to, in having this conversation with Grace around it, it's good for us to think about, well, what does the curriculum, or our Australian curriculum, talk to us about writing at this year level? And I think, like Grace has already talked about this in terms of the way that Littlehampton Primary School was working with a program, it was a reading-writing connection. Yep. And, reading and writing are reciprocal processes. So even whilst we're talking about writing now, we can't separate it out from reading either. And so I think the important statement from the English curriculum in Australia says, in the foundation year, learning in English builds on the early years learning framework and each student's prior knowledge and experiences. Students understand that English is the shared language of the learning environment used to interact and communicate with familiar audiences for different purposes. And so there's that lovely English is here as a communication tool. And so our speaking and our writing is a critical part of that. When it talks about writing in particular, well, it certainly talks about students engaging with varieties of text for enjoyment, but that students
create short, imaginative and informative texts that include pictorial representations, short statements, performances and short recounts for a small range of purposes and audiences. So the really fundamental thing that is saying, though, in the curriculum is that by the end of reception or foundation, and during that year, children come to see themselves as writers and really view themselves as being a writer. So when we go into the achievement standards, it talks then specifically, and I feel like I'm just on a big ramble here, but
that's okay. You can keep rambling.
Yeah, thank you. That then writing is broken down into creating short written texts and including all kinds of things like retelling stories, using words and images. And this whole pictorial representation, we know how important that is. We know how much they're communicating through those, you talked about marks on the page. And so the drawing and writing are both really critical aspects in that process. That they're also creating texts that retell, report information, and state their thoughts, feelings and key ideas. So there's that really big communication focus. This one, that they're using words and phrases from learning and texts. And we're going to talk a lot about that one later, Grace, because that's just been a big explosion in your room.
It has.
And that from that formation side, form letters, spell most consonant, vowel, consonant words, and experiment with capital letters and full stops. So we've got some writing process there, but one of the things that I think is really strong that's coming through there is about students creating things for themselves.
Yep.
And really having ideas, thoughts, feelings that they can write about. And I think that really gets back to what you were saying earlier about the differentiation. Like, there's differentiation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, Sharon, that's a really broad and rich curriculum, isn't it? Like what you're talking about there. There's so many aspects to writing that are quite joyous, really, aren't they?
Yeah, and are all things that, as I said before, that I think it's just written all over the Australian curriculum, that this is about students being able to view themselves as the writer, being a successful writer, not just I've got to get something down on the page. It's about this full engagement in, right, what is it that I'm up and doing as a writer?
And without criticising particular programs, a program that's written to try and do some of these things in the curriculum has limitations, doesn't it? It's trying to connect reading and writing, but is it able to do what's on the Australian curriculum there?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I think, like you've even talked about that with me, Grace, this idea of moving students into, really actually burning to write. Not just writing because it's, okay, this is what we have to write.
Yeah.
But because what's missing from that I think the curriculum uses those words intentionally, is that we can retell something. We don't have to retell the same thing, all of us in the same words. So the idea of being a writer isn't just about, I'm going to say, the conventions of writing.
Yep.
It's about having ideas. It's about having thoughts and feelings and knowing, wow, I can communicate that, of being able to, not just be the writer who gets things on the page, but is doing the thinking and the celebrating about that. Look at what I've created. Look at what I've done. And, of course, that sharing and teacher talk with students in there. And we'll talk a bit more about that, because they're all things that you've really developed, and I'm going to say outside of the program.
Yep.
You've not using the script of a program has opened up the way that you've been able to work with your writers and have them working
Yes.
as writers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So should we just go into Sharon was helping you with some changes because you were just frustrated with, how do I get my kids writing? They're just not wanting to write.
Well, I suppose in one way, though, it was now not using the program.
And so what do you do then? Yeah.
That's the thing. I was quite overwhelmed at the start of the year when that was kind of taken away because that was the only way I'd taught before. So then I was very overwhelmed by the curriculum because it says very broad statements that sound really good, but also as a new teacher you kind of go, but how do I do that?
Yes.
So
It's like, what are the beginning steps that I take to get to what that curriculum's saying, and what are tools and strategies that I can use? So what were some of those beginning steps that helped you transition to getting those kids to start to write?
Well, a lot of those PDs were quite helpful of when you came, Sharon, and you'd show an actual lesson. You would show, how you'd start it and then how you'd bridge the gap into the reading and the writing and what kind of words you would use. And it was very specific. It wasn't really broad. It was quite like you could do it like this. And you were always like, you don't have to, but it's like an option. And I kind of ran with that. And I was like, I love that. And then it kind of grew on its own and we kind of do things in a different way, but it's still that similar like start to the lesson is always like a mini lesson with like a mentor text and using like an anchor chart, and all those things kind of really help even me know what I was teaching, and then the kids obviously knew as well, so it was good.
Yes, yeah. So just to reference back to, so for the school this year, I think we've had 3 pupil-free days, and it's all been, 2 have really focused heavily on writing, 1 more on the reading and writing. And then thrown into that, there's also been some PD 6-hour sessions.
Yes.
Around phonics.
Phonics, yeah.
And of course, that's relationship to both reading and writing. And so how students are using that. And then the other PD that I know about, but there will be other things that Grace has been involved in, is the side-by-side work in classrooms that I've been, I think, twice now, 3 times
I think
maybe.
3 times.
I've been with you during a lesson where it's coaching alongside you as you're teaching and being able to tweak, modify.
So Sharon,
different things.
With the first session you had with Grace, if you can think back there, what were some of the very beginning things that you did with her to change?
For the pupil-free day?
No, in the side-by-side.
Oh, in the side-by-side. Are we going to look at each other? We remember that.
Yeah.
Do we remember that first side-by-side?
Oh, my gosh, yes. Terrifying.
Why was it terrifying?
Because I was so nervous when you're a young teacher and you get like, you observe and you want to do really well. I remember I kind of panicked and was like, I don't know what we're trying to do here. And then Sharon kind of helped and like stepped in and kind of we did teach together. And it was so good because I could just watch how she interacted with the kids and what she would pick up, what the kids noticing, and like that would become a teaching moment.
Okay.
So I learned a lot from that, which was great.
Yeah. Which I'm going to just let listeners know too, that piece about that side-by-side coaching model is that it was Grace's lesson.
Yes.
It wasn't me choosing a lesson that I would model in the classroom. It was Grace's lesson with the very next thing that they were doing in the framework of what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so I remember we just made the focus just a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
And then from there we could talk about, what children could do with that. So I think the writing that they went to do, so we gave them the paper to work on. And so I remember at that point that, sort of immediately opened up for us some things like paper choice.
Yes.
And what kind of paper would we give students to work with, and that they could write on this piece and then stick that onto
the drawing. And I think that was the big thing for me from that side-by-side was I learnt the next steps of what I could do next. Yeah. So that was super helpful. I remember.
So how did you guys get them to want to go off and write?
Well, we really focused on their interests, and once I did that, I couldn't stop them from writing. They were so keen to write just all the time, like, can we do writing, can we do writing? Even when we do our play-based learning sessions, which is kind of a bit more free play, we set up the room, but they can kind of move and do what they want to do in a way, and then you kind of extend it. But they were all writing their own books. Like, I looked around the classroom and 90% of them, and even the ones that found writing really tricky, were like so keen to do it and to show it off because they'd written about something that they were interested in or that they had a passion for. And in my room, it happened to be animals. So we did a lot of animal stuff, but we could explore like information report, and we could explore narrative because we could kind of base it around animals. And that was kind of...
And kids love animals.
They do.
Yeah.
They love them.
They love writing about animals, about themselves.
Yeah. So that was cool.
So you sort of opened the floodgates, really, didn't you?
Yeah, accidentally. And then it kind of just... and then we just kind of, I had so many books going. We wrote a book. We went on an excursion to the community garden and we came back and they were like, can we write a book about it? Yep. So then we wrote a book about like our trip to the excursion and what they liked that they saw and their favourite part. And then they just wanted to keep adding pages and pages and pages. And I was like, yeah, why not? Like, and we made a really big book.
So this was a class book that was made?
They each did their own page.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Is that the first thing to get the floodgates open with writing? You know, if from a class where the kids don't know what to do, is that the first thing you're trying to do with a teacher?
Certainly, I think the floodgates really opened for Grace's children because, well, actually, you didn't start the year with those holding the sentence type ones.
No.
But one thing that Grace has mentioned there that certainly opens the floodgates is when things don't become just a one-off so what kind of activity.
Okay. Yep.
Where here they had something to write about.
And when they have finished writing that, they've got something else to write about?
Yeah.
And we always made sure to publish their work as well, so then they could revisit it and they were really proud of it, so they could show, like I used to post on Seesaw so their parents could see, and they'd go home and read it to their parents, or they'd take their books home, or we'd make a book out of it. So I think valuing their work as well, not just going, yep, that was one activity, we're not going to ever look at it again.
It's kind of like reusing, isn't it? Reuse. So you can, you're not just doing it and then it's finished.
Yeah. But as Grace said, that multiple people get to read it, not just those in the class, but, that parents get to read it, that there's things to share. That whole idea of sharing is so critical because that's why we write, so others can read it.
And that's seeing themselves as a writer because then they're sharing that. And we even did it with another reception class, and we kind of have that open door space that's kind of free-flowing, and like Kelly's class will always come into our class and read their work, or we'll go into theirs. So it's kind of like that shared
community of writers. What all of us, every one of us in this community is a writer. Yeah. And having instant audience.
Yeah.
And they're able to draw as well. So there's a relationship between their drawing and their writing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I love drawing. They will draw for hours.
Yep.
They love it. And I think once I made it really clear about adding detail and how that actually looks, and, we looked at illustrations we did a whole author study on Eric Carle. So we did a lot of work around his artwork, and that there's different ways you can do drawing and making and creating those illustrations. So we did a lot of collage as well, and made a book out of that too. So
yeah. Actually, there's a word that I'm going to mention, Grace. You've used it, but I think it's been a significant word in yours and your students' writing journey this year, and that's the word noticing.
Yeah.
So,
because I was going to say, once they're all writing, what's the teacher's role then when they're writing?
Well, I would kind of float, and there was certain children that I knew that needed to talk about it first before they could write what they wanted to write. Some would just take off, but those ones in particular that kind of needed that side by side, I would kind of try and help them. But what Sharon helped me to do was to make more resources around the room available as well. So we made like an alphabet chart with words that they use all the time. So then they could check that. They had one in their books that they could check. They had we had an animal chart that had all the animal names on it that they made themselves, and they drew the pictures for those animals and we put it up on the wall. And like that helped with some of those kids that didn't really need the help, but they just kind of, didn't know what to do when they couldn't spell the word properly, or those perfectionist kids that just don't want to try unless they're going to get it completely perfect.
Yeah. So you're creating all these things around the classroom and that's creating their independence, isn't it? That they can keep on going, and that frees you up to help particular children.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that your roving's changed.
It has changed.
Because of the tools being up there.
Yeah.
Because I can remember in maybe the second visit to the classroom and just went, oh my gosh, there's always a line of children that need me.
How they wanted to show me their work. So
Yes.
then I added in doing their drawing first, and then they could focus on that if they were a bit stuck with their writing, and then I could come back and help them with that. But
Yeah. And it meant that you could be a bit more targeted with children that you were going to, rather than what seemed like doing a lot of troubleshooting.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you've really found that you've got entry points for everybody.
That was the biggest thing that changed, I think, was that everyone could be involved, even if it was like just the smallest thing that they were writing one word, but they were involved and they were trying, and they could draw their picture first if they wanted, and then add their writing, because then I could help them, because their picture would be that kind of, what's it called, like trigger in your brain about what you're writing about.
Yes.
So...
And actually gives them some language to work with. When I'm writing about that picture, then if it's got detail in it, then that, can show up in my writing. I wanted to come back to the noticing, because you talked about teacher noticing. You found, the text that you're using, the noticing that your students are doing around what writers are doing and illustrators are doing, and what words are doing. It's kind of three big things here that I just wanted to move to. So you did the Eric Carle work with them, but actually any book you're working with now, your students are doing a lot of noticing.
And I think that's a big thing that changed between the program, was that I found that I was doing a lot of the noticing and the trying to guide them through everything. But when I actually let them notice what I was amazed by all the things that they noticed, and the patterns in the book, or, the words. And then I can see those words used in their own writing in really specific ways, or they'll like build on that word, and it kind of gives them a bit of inspiration. So that's been really cool.
So more floodgates opening.
More floodgates.
Yes. Because that was such a big, I noticed that so much too, about how much when they come to look at a book now, they're not sitting there waiting for you to, or not sitting there waiting, that they're ready. The book's open, or just the cover's there, and it's like they're like the reading like a writer type of, they're tuned in to, did you notice? And there's all this sometimes talk between each other before even the group discussion might even talk. There's they're very intentional about and getting them to notice. I think the author study probably let you focus in on some different things, like focusing in on patterns.
Yeah, pattern was a big one.
Focusing in on the kinds of words that Eric Carle used.
Yes.
The illustrations was definitely a big part of that. What else do we talk about? The way he organised.
Always start at a particular time of day, most of his books, so that we noticed that, and then really cool.
And then
cool.
And these are all powerful things, because they're seeing Eric Carle. He's the writer, and they can be writers like Eric Carle.
Exactly.
Can't they?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It just kind of provides, like when we use that rich literature, you can just see it reflected in their approach as well, like because they're like, they're all writers, and them thinking that they're a writer as well. It's like really important. So.
And I want to just also draw back to, when you're working with a book, it's not just, it's all just, okay, who knows where this will go. It's always very intentional about what you're bringing to students. So your good writer strategy or good writer action is always front and centre on the anchor chart around good writers.
Use interesting words.
Yeah,
in their sentences.
we did use interesting words.
Yep.
Yes.
That was a big one. And we kind of picked out what interesting words we could see in the book, and then why was it interesting.
That's good.
Yeah.
And we kind of did examples of like a sentence without interesting words, and then we added our own, and we were like, how much, more interesting is this? And
isn't this amazing what receptions are doing?
Oh, they're amazing.
Yeah.
So clever. And just, I think that was a big thing that I did this year, was we had a big focus on being brave. So good writers are brave.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that really inspired them to try, and it was okay if they, didn't really know. But as soon as I did the positive reinforcement of someone, I said, wow, look what you've done. Like, you've been so brave. And then others would hear that and want that same kind of, reflection as well. So I'd look around and everyone would be trying and being brave, and that was a big focus we had as well.
Yes.
So that helped.
Yeah. And that language of it was it was so strong and so evident in the room, even children reflecting on their own working, this is where I was being brave.
Yeah, they can see it in themselves, and they said, I didn't know this word, but I was really brave and I just had a go. And I'm like, oh, well, that's exactly what we want. That's what good writers do.
Yeah.
And that was really cool.
And and it's a lot of those kinds of good writer statements around bravery that drove a lot of the mini lessons.
Yes.
And when we think about what it is that at foundation, prep, reception, whatever we call it, when we think about what is it that makes someone view themselves as being a writer, it always involves being brave.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the ways we often talk about it is being, a risk taker. But that bravery, I love that term.
Me too.
Brave, because it's got such a strong feeling attached to it. Risk taker, that could be, take a risk, might not always be a good choice kind of thing.
Yep.
But a brave choice says, I've got that within me. I can be brave and do this. So I think such a strong and powerful word for
just building up that resilience in them as well, because a lot of them would sit there with a blank page and just almost, not even know where to start, and they were just like, I can't do it. And then we talked about, let's just be brave, just have a go. There's no wrong. There's no wrong when you're writing. And then they would just start, and then they'd find that they could do it and that they'd get really into it. And then they'd be like, oh my gosh, look, like I did this. And I'm like, oh, wow, like that's amazing. So
yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we haven't said is that at the time of the recording of this podcast, we are heading towards the end of a school year.
Yes.
It's great time to be able to be talking with Grace about, from early in the year through to now. But I think our reception, our 5-year-olds have got, out of all of the year levels in school, their beginning of the year journey is so different to any other year in school, because it's that in terms of the writing, we are doing much more shared and interactive writing. We're doing lots more writing together.
Yeah.
So modelling that and doing it, and that what we go and do bravely for ourselves is all really connected to what students know and can showcase around their knowledge of letters and forming letters and what sounds those letters make. And so all of that, of course, is running really strongly alongside of all of this. The phonics work, because that's actually where phonics knowledge is playing out so heavily, is when I'm going to try and write something which is entirely what we're doing as beginning writers is we're giving it a go.
Yep.
We're being brave and we're trying that out.
So, Grace, you're doing all this, lots of writing and reading. So that's all happening in the classroom, but the PD and the phonics, how did that connect with?
Yeah, so I use mentor text now to introduce a new sound, and so that was a big one with noticing. They noticed a new sound or an old sound constantly, which was almost too much sometimes, because they would just be like, oh my gosh, like double E, and you're like, yep, we're looking at this sound now. But they'd get really excited about double E was a big one. They loved that one. And then I think the way I teach phonics now is about like letters have more than one sound, which I used to really focus on, just like and it would be like A, but then it actually makes an O sound, like in what, and all those different things that you don't really think about. And so I thought it would confuse them a lot to hear all these different sounds, but the ones that are ready for it, like, take off with it, and then the ones that are still just kind of getting their head around it, they can still, access it just on that one single sound or those kinds of things. So yeah,
but also have it there as the awareness of, oh my goodness, I've just noticed that A makes an O sound.
Exactly.
and
they'll all notice it as well. Like, so that's been really good too, to kind of use those actual literature to introduce a sound, and that made it, kind of gave them context for different sounds, and then they kind of go, oh, I remember that book, so I remember that, night has that IGH, special friend, and that kind of thing. So we kind of
and they're becoming word watchers.
We haven't really introduced that term, but I really want to, because I really like it.
That's the next thing.
I think they're word watchers without like naming it as word watcher.
They're noticers.
They're noticers.
I think that's probably
word
the term that the noticing, because the noticing is across, all of these different areas, different aspects of writing, as words, as ideas, as actually there was something you said earlier about, being stuck on the page sometimes, and what will I write, or getting started with it. That's definitely been such a big growth point across the year. And of course, starting with a new 5-year-old class again, there would still be some who are going to go, okay, I have to get brave, and I have to give this a go, and because that's where we are. But I think what you've really talked about here is allowing children to showcase not just conventions, but showcase ideas, showcase how they did something like Eric Carle would have done, how they gave that word a go, and how they've got most of the letters right.
I know. So that's
not just, actually, that's probably another thing. I feel like we've talked about that even before the David Hornsby PD, the phonics PD, is about noticing what letters they have got right, and not just, oh, well, the whole word's wrong.
Yeah.
But what's right, yes, you've got a match for that letter and that sound, and so that all makes, good and big sense.
And we'll take a break there from part 1 of our podcast. We look forward to you joining us for part 2. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.